Welcome back to Great Day. It is one of the oldest sports in the world, and since it's still around, clearly we still like it. Global wrestling juggernaut WWE reportedly made more than $1.7 billion in revenue last year alone. Professional wrestling doesn't have an off season, and you can find programming nearly any day of the week, and there are millions of hours of matches online. Superstars like Roman Reigns, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Hulk Hogan became household names. Through most of the 20th century, live events happened on a regular basis in what were called territories. Promoters brought in international stars and cultivated local grapplers. One of the most influential territories of the 1900s was right here in Houston. While many longtime residents remember Paul Bosch running weekly matches at the Sam Houston Coliseum, the story of Houston wrestling began over 100 years ago. Today, we bring you the first in a series of features looking at the profound impact our city has had on the professional wrestling industry, brought to prominence by a man named Morris Sigel.
Is it great to be alive on a Monday night in Houston or what?
And Houston was one of the greatest moments of my career.
WrestleMania 2001.
Houston Wrestling by Paul Bosch.
Houston, Texas, Paul Bosch!
I wanted to be like Paul Bosch.
The real people of Houston know what kind of man I am.
Here's the pile driver. Oh! Morris Sigel presents Wrestling Roundup.
Now, the start of wrestling goes back to really 1915 in our area.
Officially, they think of it as starting in 1916.
You've got to go back to the Sigel brothers, specifically Julius and Morris Sigel.
Originally, Julius was in charge, but then he left for New Orleans and Shreveport.
Julius Sigel would start the empire in the 1920s, 1922 specifically, and they would go on to travel and be so successful at what he was doing, continuing the circuit to promote the sport of wrestling.
By the end of the 20s, Morris was in charge. Now, originally, Morris had a full-time job at a lumber mill.
I remember meeting Morris Sigel as a youngster. He's very quiet, very polite, but what a promoter.
During the Depression, he lost his job, so fate intervened and he ended up working full-time for Houston Wrestling.
He was the first licensed wrestling promoter in the state of Texas. He was also the first licensed boxing promoter in the state of Texas.
And he was actually the first promoter to get accommodation from the Texas state legislature.
And I know Houston was the booking office when Morris had it.
Not only the promoter for Houston wrestling, but the booker for all of Texas for about 4 decades.
The thing about wrestling is it really does connect everybody. It's about the sport, it's about the energy.
Here we come, the dynamic duo, Gorgeous Gino and Graham Marcus.
Oh my God! And for the 20-foot ladder!
Professional wrestling is Broadway with body slams.
A peculiar type of showmanship.
It's a male soap opera.
And Houston specifically has benefited from it over the decades.
Blood going along, and Jesse just muscles up his hair, and George is mad.
Snooker trying to outbalance him. Look at the way that guy can jump. Tremendous. And he get him with a crossbody block.
Morris Sigel, being a great businessman, it was to his advantage to book as many events in the city auditorium as he could.
In the 1910 City Auditorium was this space that held over 3,000 people. You had everything from ballet to symphony to opera. You had graduation events there, and you had wrestling.
Wrestling had a tremendous period of popularity back in around 1930.
So historically, even when people are struggling, they do seek forms of entertainment as long as they're reasonably priced.
Friday nights were always synonymous of wrestling since the very beginning of it.
It became a regular habit for people. They never wanted to miss a Friday night. The ticket prices might have been 10 cents or 5 cents, but people would bring in their pennies and come.
And people were actually bringing their piggy banks and busting them to buy tickets when all these businesses were failing. The Depression was going on. They wanted that escape.
You can have that escape for that moment, suspend reality for a minute.
The characters, while they're over the top, they're larger than life, there are aspects of their characters that people relate to, and in some cases aspire to.
Matchmakers are going to match people whose styles attract the fans.
Back in the 30s during the Great Depression, probably one of the most famous wrestlers of the time period was a guy named Whiskers Savage.
Leo Daniel Boone Whiskers Savage.
Whiskers was brought to Texas by Houston promoter Morris Sigel.
And he was the ultimate Depression era hero.
One of the phenomenon of the entire 1930s. That's Whiskers Savage.
He was just kind of symbolic of the American at the time.
Scuffling hillbilly from Kentucky.
He couldn't believe that he would actually get paid to scuffle. He wouldn't call it wrestling, it was scuffling.
And he was known for dressing as like the poor everyman in like vagabond type outfits, torn jeans.
He was so poor he couldn't even afford a belt. He had to get a piece of rope to tie it around the pants.
And Whiskers was known for his pet chicken, his pet possum, his hunting dog.
He brought along his pet rooster, and he put it on the ring post.
And he put the pet chicken on the old turnbuckle over there.
And he'd take the leash off, and he would tell that chicken, as if not to move. Well, the fact of the matter is, there were so many screaming people, so much noise, that chicken was scared and was not going to move.
He was one of the ones that people rallied around back in the 1930s. He gave people hope at a time when we needed it the most here in our city.
Wherever Whiskers Savage went, prosperity followed for wrestling promoters and for the fans because they were rich in action.
I think that's one of the things that made Houston wrestling just a level above most regional promotions, is that they added that extra dimension.
Patriotism and war bonds packed Houston, Texas for a championship match between champ Mildred Burke in white and the challenger Mae Weston. 11,000 bought 20 millions in bonds to see these two dignified young ladies have a quiet romp.
January 21st, 1944 for the war effort.
The Houston Symphony and the Houston Wrestlers performed together.
And the idea was to raise money for war bonds.
They were conducting, they were doing musical interludes as the intermission was going on, as people were on stage.
During one of the matches, a wrestler named Ellis Becerra,
who was actually a music major,
kind of elbowed the conductor out of the way.
All bloody, takes the conductor's wand from the Houston Symphony and starts conducting the symphony, and actually legitimately does it because, again, he's got a background in music.
They ended up raising $30 million in war bond sales.
And that had never been done before, really anywhere.
And then 1949, January 1st, television came to Houston.
Wrestling has been on the forefront of the entertainment business since television began.
In 1949, there were 2 TV shows on in Houston, and Houston Wrestling was one of them.
One of the only regular programs on early TV. There was Howdy Doody, Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, and then there was wrestling.
Before cable television came along in any one of those territories, in any major city, wrestling was the most watched television program in any of those markets.
Whether or not the whole... Now look here, what's the big idea pulling something? He's nothing but a liar!
It was so big that it led to a lot of problems in the wrestling business in the 1950s.
It didn't take long before Houston wrestling fans said, I can stay home. I can watch this for free. I don't have to go downtown, buy a ticket.
The wrestlers started to get upset with the fact that the TV was hurting the live gates. And actually the wrestlers went out on strike one time before a TV taping in San Antonio.
There was also the overexposure and saturation.
Here we go to the ropes. And a leg trip, and up comes Buckley. Oh, he's got it. This may be it right here.
And all of that led to the Texas Wrestling War of the 1950s between the Dallas office and the Houston office.
Ed McLemore in Dallas tried to take the booking office over.
And it ended up being about an 18-month war where they went head-to-head in Dallas, in Fort Worth, in Corpus Christi.
I think there were some shenanigans that went on back in those days. The Sportatorium burned down twice.
The Dallas office doesn't really get control of the state of Texas until after Morris Siegel's death in 1966.
The news came on and they said longtime wrestling promoter Morris Sigel has died.
When Morris dies in 1966, Paul buys Houston Wrestling from his widow.
He waited a few weeks and he finally contacted Sherry Sigel and she said, I'm sure glad you called because we were about to sell it to somebody else. We did not think you were interested. And Paul said, I was trying to give you some time before we talked business. but it came very close that he missed out.
It seems like 1967 is a great year in Houston wrestling. It doesn't seem like they miss a beat.
I wish I'd have got to know a little bit more, but very smart, very caring person.
He was one of the first people to go out there and actually have some of the wrestling match benefit local charities here in Houston.
At one point in the 1950s, Morris Sigel figured that he had run 7,500 wrestling cards and drawn more than 6 million customers.
You also look at inclusion. He actually had one of the first times you had African-American female wrestlers on the stage here in Houston, Texas, and in the South. Those are things that he did to push the envelope, and he was somebody who should be remembered more for his contributions specifically to the Houston wrestling scene and the industry in general.
I think that Morris Sigel has a little bit been lost to time, so I'm really excited to see us rediscover his legacy. He was the grandfather of Texas wrestling, and he was the father of Houston wrestling.
Great memories, I think, is created through professional wrestling.
I sometimes say to people, I don't know what heaven is, but I feel like if heaven is the way I picture it, then I'll just get to go to every Friday night card in Houston wrestling history, from the 1930s all the way until 1987, just Friday after Friday after Friday. All my friends and family will be there, all the old wrestlers will be there, and it'll just be like a party every Friday night.
I have loved Bill Curry for almost 23 years, and if he can love like he can fight, I would love to take him home with me.
All right, there you go, Mama. All right, we'd like to thank all of the contributors to this project, including images provided by Houston Public Library, the Greg Klein Collection, Library of Congress, and Mr. McKinney's Historic Houston Archives. Stay tuned for more Houston wrestling features in the near future. To view and share this segment, go to our YouTube page at Great Day Houston.